The millionaire's son saw a girl returning milk to the shelf, and what he did next, the price of shame, insufficient funds. The cashier's shout shattered the usual murmur of the supermarket like glass hitting the floor. It wasn't a discreet warning. It was a public judgment, delivered with that biting tone of someone who enjoys wielding a small power over another's misfortune. Lily felt her blood run cold. Her hands, small and chapped from the street's chill, trembled visibly on the metal counter. She clutched that can of powdered milk as if it were the only life raft in a stormy ocean. It wasn't for her. Her stomach rumbled. Yes, she had spent 2 days tricking hunger with public tap water, but that milk wasn't for her. It was for the only person she had left in the world. "Please, miss," Lily whispered, her voice cracking, not daring to lift her gaze. Her eyes were fixed on her worn-out sneakers, open at the toes where her poverty peeked through. "Try it one more time. Maybe the machine failed. I just need this can. Just one." The cashier, a woman with a sour face who seemed to have lost her patience a decade ago, snorted loudly, making a theatrical gesture so everyone in line noticed her annoyance. "Kid, I've swiped this grubby card 3 times. There's no money. Zero. Nada. Understand? Or should I draw you a picture?" The woman slapped the card against the counter. "You're holding up the line. There are important people waiting, people who can actually pay." Behind Lily, the world seemed to have stopped. The air became heavy, suffocating. She could feel eyes fixed on her back. They weren't looks of compassion, they were looks of judgment. Society doesn't forgive poverty when it interrupts its hurry. Just behind her, the imposing figure of Richard Thompson loomed like a tower of impatience. Richard wasn't used to waiting. His life was timed by meetings, stock market closures, and million-dollar decisions. Standing in a supermarket line was an anomaly for him, a glitch in his perfect system. He was only doing it because it was his weekend with Ethan, and his ex-wife had demanded he do normal things with the boy. "Unbelievable," Richard muttered, checking his wristwatch, completely ignoring the human drama unfolding a meter away from him. He saw only an obstacle, a messy obstacle. "Ethan, don't stray. Don't touch anything. This place is full of careless people." But Ethan, at 7 years old and in his immaculate school uniform, wasn't looking at his father's watch. Nor was he looking at his phone. His eyes, large and observant, were fixed on the girl in front of them. Ethan saw what his father refused to see. He saw that the girl's clothes were 3 sizes too big for her, as if she had shrunk inside them. He saw that her hair was tangled, not from defiance, but from lack of a mirror and a comb. But above all, he saw how her shoulders subtly shook in a silent cry she tried with all her might to suppress. "Dad," Ethan said, gently tugging at the sleeve of Richard's perfect suit jacket. "Not now, Ethan. I'm trying to see how much longer this spectacle will take," Richard replied, his gaze fixed on the back of the girl's head, with a mix of disgust and boredom. "Hey, you at the cash register!" Richard raised his voice. His authoritative tone resonated above the hum of the refrigerators. "What's the problem? If the kid doesn't have money, just get her out of here. I'm in a hurry. My time costs more than everything in this aisle." Richard's comment was like a slap. Lily shrank further. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to merge with the floor and cease to exist. The humiliation burned more than the hunger. The cashier, feeling supported by the man in the suit, smirked maliciously. "You heard the gentleman, kid. Beat it." The cashier reached out and snatched the can of milk from Lily's fingers. It was an abrupt, violent movement. "No!" The cry escaped Lily's throat by instinct. She tried to hold onto the can, her fingers white from the force she exerted. "Please, it's medicine. It's for... I need it. I promise I'll bring the money later." "Let go," the cashier barked, pulling hard. The can slipped from Lily's hands. The metallic sound of it hitting the counter and then being disdainfully tossed into a returns box under the table echoed like a gunshot. Lily was left with empty hands, suspended in the air, as if still holding the hope that had just been torn from her. It was in that instant, in that second of absolute silence where only the girl's ragged breath could be heard, that Ethan did something that broke the pattern. The boy let go of his father's hand, stepped forward, invading the girl's personal space, and raised his right arm. With a firm finger, he pointed directly at Lily's face. The image froze. Richard looked at his son, expecting the boy, educated in the best private schools, to make some comment about the girl's hygiene or to mock her, just as he had implicitly taught him by his example. The cashier waited for the final insult. Lily closed her eyes, preparing for the final blow of mockery, but the silence lingered, charged with an electrical tension that made the skin prickle. The blindness of ego. Richard observed the scene with a raised eyebrow. In his mind, the equation was simple. His son was about to teach that vagrant a lesson about her place in the world. Richard smiled arrogantly. Well done, son. Make a difference. Let her know we don't belong to the same universe. For Richard, poverty wasn't a circumstance. It was a choice, or worse, a contagious disease. He had spent the last 20 years building a wall of money around his heart to forget where he came from. Seeing that dirty girl provoked a physical reaction of repulsion, as if the mere sight of her rags could stain his immaculate Italian suit. "Ethan, that's it," Richard said with a voice that pretended to be pedagogical but sounded cruel. "Tell her to move. Tell her successful people don't have all day to watch her cry over spilled milk." But Ethan didn't lower his finger, and his face showed no mockery. It showed painful confusion, the kind only children feel when they realize the adult world is broken. "Dad," Ethan said again, still pointing at Lily, but this time turning his head towards his father. His eyes filled with tears. Why is she trembling? The question disarmed Richard's air of superiority for a second, but his armor was too thick. Because she's cold, or hungry, or scared. What do I know, Ethan? It's not our problem, Richard replied, snapping his fingers. Stop pointing, it's rude. Come back here. Let's go to another checkout. I'm not breathing this air for another second. Richard tried to grab Ethan's shoulder to drag him away, but the boy stood firm on the ground with unusual strength for his age. No! Ethan yelled, shaking off his father's hand. The child's cry made several customers in adjacent lines turn around. Richard felt the heat rise to his neck. He hated scandals. He hated losing control. Ethan, don't make me. Richard threatened, lowering his voice with clenched teeth. She's not buying candy, Dad, Ethan interrupted, his voice gaining strength, vibrating with pure indignation. You told me poor people spend their money on vices. You told me they're lazy, but she just wants milk. Lily opened her eyes, looked at the rich boy, the boy who smelled of expensive cologne and soap, and saw something she hadn't seen in months. Humanity. Look at her shoes, Dad, Ethan insisted, now pointing at Lily's feet. They have holes, and she's returning the milk. She's not stealing. She's returning it. The cashier, feeling she was losing control of her own register, chimed in with a shrill voice. Listen, sir, control your son. This brat is a first-class scammer. They always come with long faces begging for mercy. Give them an inch, and they'll take a mile. Take the boy away before he catches lice. Those words acted as a trigger for Richard, not out of compassion for the girl, but as a confirmation of his own prejudices. The cashier was right. It was an emotional trap. Those people always manipulate. Richard took a long stride and stepped between Ethan and Lily, using his body as a shield. He looked down at the girl with a coldness that could freeze hell. Listen to me closely, Richard said directly to Lily, not shouting, but with a tone sharp as a scalpel. I don't know what game you're playing to impress my son, but it won't work with me. Take your things, if you have any, and leave. You're bothering people. You're an eyesore. Lily lifted her chin. Despite the grime on her face, despite the hunger gnawing at her insides, there was an ancient dignity in her dark eyes. A dignity Richard had forgotten existed. I'm not playing games, sir, she said with a voice so soft, Richard had to lean slightly to hear her. And I don't want your money. I just wanted my grandma not to die today. The sentence hung in the air. Your grandma? Richard let out a dry, incredulous laugh. Please, the sick grandmother story. What's next? Do you have a lame dog? A blind brother? Save the soap opera script. Richard turned to the cashier, pulling out his black leather wallet. He extracted a platinum card that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Ring up my things, fast, and for goodness sake, call security to get the trash out of the aisle. The word trash hit Lily harder than any punch. A solitary tear rolled down her dirty cheek, leaving a clean streak on her skin. She nodded slowly, accepting defeat, accepting that in this world, being right didn't matter if you didn't have a bank balance. Lily turned to leave, dragging her feet. But Ethan wasn't finished. The boy put his hand into the pocket of his beige pants. He searched desperately. His fingers closed around something metallic and cold. It wasn't much. It wasn't an unlimited credit card. It was something much more valuable to him. Wait, Ethan shouted. Lily stopped, but didn't turn around. She didn't want to be seen crying anymore. Ethan ran to the counter, dodging his father's hand, which tried to stop him again. He reached the cashier, and with a dull thud, placed an object on the conveyor belt. It wasn't just any coin. It was an old, large, heavy silver collector's coin. A lucky coin Ethan's grandfather, Richard's father, had given him before he died, saying, "This is your lucky coin, champ. Only use it when it really matters. Use it to save something you love." "Is this enough?" Ethan asked, looking the cashier in the eyes, defiant. "It's real silver. My grandpa said it's worth a lot. Pay for the milk, pay for whatever she wants." Richard was petrified. He recognized the coin instantly. It was the only emotional inheritance his own father had left the boy. Richard had tried to buy it from Ethan 1,000 times to put it in a safe, but the boy never let it go. And now he was giving it away for a stranger, for a nobody. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Richard's voice came out strangled, unrecognizable. Fury and disbelief battled in his throat. "What you're not doing, Dad," the boy replied without looking at him. "Buying justice." The cashier looked at the coin with greed. Then she looked at Richard, seeking approval to take it. Richard felt the ground shifting. His son was humiliating him. His son was breaking the rules of the game. Richard's rage erupted. He couldn't allow that girl to manipulate his son to that extent. He lunged towards the counter to retrieve the coin, pushing Lily, who had timidly approached upon seeing the boy's gesture. "Don't you dare touch that," Richard roared, waving his hand in the air. His large, heavy hand accidentally struck Lily's arm as he tried to push her away. The blow wasn't strong, but it was enough to destabilize the fragile girl. Lily stumbled and fell to her knees. As she fell, her worn sleeve caught on the edge of the counter and tore. Something fell from her wrist. It wasn't a watch. It wasn't a jewel. It was a bracelet. A simple, hand-woven bracelet of old, faded red thread, with a very specific knot pattern, a pattern that braided 3 threads into one, ending in a small infinity knot. The bracelet landed right next to Richard's Italian leather shoes. The world stopped. The supermarket noise disappeared. Richard looked down, furious, ready to yell at the girl to get up. But then he saw the bracelet, and his heart stopped beating. His breath hitched. His eyes widened disproportionately, losing all trace of arrogance, replaced by absolute terror. It couldn't be. It was impossible. That bracelet, that weaving, that specific knot. In the end, there was only one person in the world who knew how to make that knot. A woman he had left behind 30 years ago. A woman who had promised him that knot would keep him tied to his destiny no matter how far he ran. Richard fell to his knees, not out of humility, but because his legs simply stopped responding. His trembling hand reached for the dirty supermarket floor to touch the red thread. Where did you get this?" Richard whispered, his voice broken, looking at Lily with eyes that no longer saw a vagrant, but a ghost. The red thread of destiny. Time, that concept Richard believed he controlled with his Swiss watches and meticulous calendars, completely disintegrated. On his knees on the dirty supermarket floor, surrounded by curious glances and murmurs of disapproval, the millionaire was nothing more than a frightened child trapped in an adult's body. His fingers brushed the rough texture of the bracelet. It wasn't a simple ornament. It was a map to a past he had buried under layers of concrete, success, and oblivion. That knot, that braided 3-strand knot, ending in an imperfect infinity, was the signature of only one woman in the world. One thread for you, one for me, and one for God. So he never lets go of us. She used to tell him while weaving by candlelight in that corrugated tin shack where the rain sounded like war drums. "It's mine!" Lily's voice broke Richard's trance. It was a choked cry, full of panic. The girl, seeing that suited giant kneeling in front of her, interpreted his silence as a greater threat. In her world, when an adult fell silent and stared at you, the blow that followed was usually the hardest. With a quick movement, born of the survival instinct of one who has had to defend every crumb of bread, Lily lunged to the floor. Her small, dirty hands clawed at the floor, snatching the bracelet from Richard's trembling fingers. "Don't take it from me, it's all I have," she wailed, scrambling backward on all fours, her eyes wide with terror. Richard blinked, suddenly returning to reality. But reality wasn't the same. The bright supermarket, with its white lights and perfectly aligned products, now seemed like a false stage, an empty shell. "No, wait," Richard stammered, trying to get up, but his legs felt like lead. "Who gave you that? Tell me, who made it for you?" His tone wasn't gentle. He didn't know how to be gentle. Desperation made his voice sound like a demanding, authoritarian roar. Lily didn't wait to hear more. Fear injected pure adrenaline into her veins. She jumped to her feet, leaving the can of milk behind, leaving Ethan's silver coin on the belt, leaving behind any hope of food. She only cared about protecting the bracelet. "Leave me alone," she cried and ran. She bolted towards the automatic exit, her broken sneakers hitting the polished floor with a frantic rhythm. "Hey, get back here!" the cashier shouted, more concerned with the scandal than with the girl. "Security, the thief is escaping!" That word, thief, finally broke something inside Richard. He stood up, swaying as if drunk with shock. He looked at the cashier. That woman who minutes earlier had seemed like an ally in efficiency, now seemed like a grotesque monster painted with cheap makeup. "Shut up," Richard growled with an intensity that made the woman recoil and swallow hard. "Don't you dare call her that!" Richard looked at Ethan. The boy was pale, mouth open, looking where the girl had fled. "Dad, she's gone," Ethan whispered, his voice broken. "She's gone, without the milk." "Not for long," Richard said. A fierce determination hardened his face. It wasn't the determination to close a deal. It was the vital urgency of someone who needs air to breathe. Richard spun on his heels, ignoring the cart full of expensive wines and imported cheeses. He ignored his platinum credit card still in the machine. "Sir, your card, your purchase," the cashier shouted, waving the plastic in the air. "Keep it," Richard roared without turning, grabbing Ethan's hand tightly. "Charge everything. Charge triple if you want. Just don't make me lose another second." Richard dragged his son towards the exit. The automatic doors opened, and the humid street heat hit their faces. The traffic noise, the honking, the city chaos, all seemed amplified. "Do you see her?" Richard asked, desperately scanning the crowd. His blue eyes, usually cold and calculating, frantically searched among the people, the cars, the gray colors of the sidewalk. "There," Ethan pointed. About 50 meters away, a small figure in oversized clothes turned the corner, running with a slight but quick limp. She was heading towards the area Richard always avoided, the zone where the asphalt cracked and the city lights didn't reach. "Let's go," Richard said. And for the first time in years, Richard ran. He didn't run on an air-conditioned gym treadmill. He ran on hot concrete, his leather-soled shoes slipping, feeling sweat soak his $1,000 shirt in seconds. He wasn't running after a girl. He was running after a ghost he thought dead 30 years ago. He was running after the terrifying and wonderful possibility that his memory was playing tricks on him, or worse, that it wasn't. Where the asphalt ends, the chase led them far from the main avenue, far from the gleaming storefronts and trendy cafes. They crossed an invisible line that divides all great cities, the border between those who have and those who survive. The air changed. It no longer smelled of fresh-baked bread and burnt gasoline. Now it smelled of stagnant dampness, accumulated garbage, and hopelessness. Richard gasped. His heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. Ethan, beside him, ran with admirable stamina, driven by a mission he understood better than his father, to help. "Dad, wait," Ethan shouted, pointing towards a narrow alley between two abandoned buildings. "She went in there. I saw her." Richard stopped for a second, resting his hands on his knees to catch his breath. He looked at the alley. It was a dark hole, a black mouth in the city's facade, walls covered in illegible graffiti, puddles of black water on the ground, and mountains of cardboard stacked against the walls. Just an hour ago, Richard would have called the police if he had to approach such a place. He would have locked the doors of his armored car. He would have felt disgust. Now he felt a different fear, a reverential fear. "Stay close to me, Ethan," he ordered, loosening the silk tie that felt like a noose around his neck. "Don't let go of my hand." They entered the alley. Sunlight barely touched the ground there. The silence was dense, broken only by the sound of their own footsteps and the distant drip of a broken pipe. They walked a few meters, dodging broken glass and garbage. At the end of the alley, where the path seemed to end in a blind wall, there was a precarious structure. It wasn't a house. It was a shelter made of scraps, rusted tin sheets, blue construction plastic, and wooden boxes. Richard felt a knot in his stomach. The architecture of misery. He knew it. He had been born in one just like it. He had erased it from his mind, covered it with marble and glass in his mansion, but his body remembered it. He remembered the cold seeping through the cracks, the sound of rain on the plastic. "Out!" A child's voice shouted from the darkness of the structure. Lily emerged from behind the plastic curtains, holding a wooden stick in her hands like a sword. She was trembling from head to toe, but she stood in front of the shelter's entrance, blocking the way. Her eyes were red from crying but shone with a defensive fury. "Don't come closer," she yelled, waving the stick. "I don't have anything. I told you I don't have money. If you come closer, I'll scream." Richard raised his hands, showing his open palms. Seeing that little girl, so fragile, trying to defend her castle of trash against an adult man, disarmed him completely. "I don't want to hurt you," Richard said, his voice hoarse. He took a slow step forward. "Lily, that's your name, isn't it?" Lily, put down the stick. Liar, she accused. You're bad. You pushed me down. You wanted to steal my bracelet. Get out. No, Ethan interrupted, stepping forward, letting go of his father's hand. We don't want to steal from you. Look. Ethan reached into his pocket again and pulled out the silver coin. It gleamed in the alley's gloom like a small moon. I brought it for you, the boy said, extending his hand. It's for the milk. Take it. Lily lowered the stick a few centimeters. She looked at the coin. Then she looked at Ethan. The boy's innocence was a universal language she understood, unlike the cruel complexity of adults. Why? She asked suspiciously. What do you want in return? Nobody gives anything for free. Richard swallowed. He felt his heart was going to pound out of his chest. He had to ask the question that had brought him running to this hell. The bracelet, Richard began, and saw Lily tense up again. I don't want it, I swear. I just need to know who taught you to make that knot. The infinity knot. Lily frowned, confused. She lowered the stick completely but didn't move from the entrance. Nobody taught me, she said softly. My grandma made it. She makes them. She says they're for tying luck, but... Her voice broke, and she looked inside the plastic shack. But I think ours broke. She's really sick. Richard's world tilted on its axis. My grandma made it. Your grandma? Richard asked, feeling his legs give way again. He took another, almost involuntary step, towards the plastic curtain. Is she in there? Yes, but she can't have visitors, Lily said, blocking the way again, though with less conviction. She's sleeping. She has a high fever, that's why I wanted the milk. She says she's thirsty, but the water tastes bad to her. Richard didn't ask permission. This time he couldn't. The force driving him was greater than any social norm or courtesy. I need to see her, he said. And it wasn't an order. It was a plea. Dad, Ethan warned, scared by the intensity in his father's voice. Richard pushed forward. Lily tried to stop him, but he gently moved her aside, a softness that contrasted with his earlier violence in the supermarket. I'll just look. I promise. Richard pushed aside the blue plastic that served as a door. The smell of sickness, stale sweat, and cheap medicine hit him. He entered the gloom. His eyes took a few seconds to adjust to the darkness. The interior was suffocating. There was an old mattress thrown on wooden pallets to avoid ground dampness, and on the mattress, under a patched gray blanket, was a small lump. A dry, deep cough shook the lump. Richard approached, feeling like he was walking on glass. He knelt beside the mattress, not caring that the mud stained his designer pants. The woman on the mattress stirred. Her hair was completely white, sparse, and matted. Her skin was like wrinkled parchment, clinging to her bones. She was consumed by life, by hunger, by years. But then she opened her eyes. They weren't defeated eyes. They were deep, honey-colored eyes, surrounded by 1,000 wrinkles, but with a spark of lucidity that defied death. She looked at the man in the suit, who was invading her humble abode. She blinked slowly, confused by the fever. Richard felt the air escape his lungs. 30 years had passed. Her hair was white, her skin marked, her teeth missing. But that gaze that had comforted him when his own biological father beat him drunk, that gaze that had given him a plate of hot soup when there was nothing in his house. Grandma Rose, Richard whispered with the voice of a 7-year-old boy. The elderly woman frowned, trying to focus. Her bony hand emerged from beneath the blanket and fumbled in the air. Who? Her voice was a raspy hiss. I don't have any money, sir. Leave us alone. No, Rose, look at me. Richard took off the sunglasses he still wore on his head, as if that could also remove the years of cynicism from him. It's me. It's Rudd, Carmen's son, the boy with the red tricycle. The elderly woman's hand stopped in the air. Her eyes opened a little wider, fixing on Richard's face, searching beneath the well-groomed beard, beneath the hydrated skin, beneath the businessman's demeanor, searching for the boy she had fed. Rod, she whispered, and a solitary tear welled from her tired eyes. The one who promised to come back. The sentence fell on Richard like a ton of bricks. The one who promised to come back. Memory hit him with the force of a tsunami the day he left. Adopted by a distant, wealthy family after his mother's death, he was 10 years old. He got into the black car crying and yelled to his neighbor, the only one who had cared for him, I'm coming back, Grandma Rose. I'm going to be rich, and I'm going to come for you so you never have to sell bracelets again. I promise. 30 years had passed, and he never came back. Until today, when destiny had dragged him by the ear to this alley. Yes. Richard lowered his head, and the tears he had held back for decades began to fall onto his hands, wetting the dirt floor. It's me, and I'm late. My God, I'm so late. The weight of a broken promise. The cry of a powerful man is a sound nature doesn't expect. It is guttural, clumsy, like the creak of a building collapsing from its foundations. Richard, the financial shark, the man who didn't bat an eye dismissing hundreds of employees to balance a ledger, was broken on the packed dirt floor. His hands clung to Grandma Rose's worn blanket as if it were a sacred shroud. Forgive me, old woman," Richard repeated, his face buried in the mattress. The smell of dampness and sickness filled his nose, but it was the smell of his childhood, the smell of truth he had tried to wash away with French colognes. Grandma Rose, with a titanic effort, raised her trembling hand. Her fingers, deformed by years of arthritis and hard work, sought Richard's hair. She caressed it with the same tenderness she had 30 years ago, when he came crying because the other children mocked his broken shoes. "There, my boy, there," she whispered with a weak smile that showed her pale gums. "Don't cry. Tears don't take away hunger or cure fever. They just clean the eyes to see better." Richard lifted his head. His blue eyes were bloodshot, swollen. "I forgot you, Rose." "That's the truth," he confessed, and the words burned his throat like acid. There were no excuses about work, or his adoptive family, or lack of time. It was a naked confession. "I got lost in the money. I thought if I didn't look back, the past would disappear. But you were here waiting for me." "I wasn't waiting for you to save me, Rod," she said, and a dry cough shook her fragile body, making her chest sound like a bag of stones. "I waited because I wanted to see what kind of man you had become. I wanted to know if that good heart you had was still beating under the expensive clothes." Lily observed the scene from the entrance with the wooden stick still in her hand, but lowered. Her eyes darted from the elderly woman to the rich man, confused. She didn't understand how this monster who had humiliated her in the supermarket was now crying at her grandma's feet like a scolded child. "Grandma," Lily said, taking a timid step towards the mattress. "Do you know him? Is he the one you tell me about in stories? The boy with the tricycle?" Grandma Rose slowly turned her head towards her granddaughter. The love in her gaze was so intense, it illuminated the gloom of the shack. "Yes, my dear, it's him. The one I told you would come someday, though he took a little longer than expected," Rose said, trying to add a touch of humor, but it ended in a grimace of pain. Richard looked at Lily. Now he truly saw her. He no longer saw a vagrant. He saw Rose's features in her. He saw the same defiant chin, the same dignity in poverty. Richard began to ask. "She's my Lucy's daughter," Rose replied, and a shadow of infinite sadness crossed her face. "Lucy died 2 years ago, a poorly treated pneumonia. We couldn't afford a doctor. She passed in my arms, just as I am leaving now." The revelation hit Richard like a physical punch. Lucy. He remembered Lucy. She was Rose's little daughter, who used to play hide and seek with him. She had died for lack of money, for lack of the help he had promised. Guilt transformed into something heavier, something unbearable. If he had returned 5 or 10 years ago, Lucy would be alive. Lily wouldn't be an orphan. "No," Richard groaned, closing his eyes tightly. "My God, what have I done?" "Don't blame yourself for what you didn't do, Rod," Rose told him, squeezing his hand with surprising strength. "Focus on what you can do now. I'm already on my way out. My ticket's punched." "But she pointed at Lily with a trembling finger. "She's left alone. She has no one. The landlord will kick us out tomorrow if we don't pay. They'll take her to a state orphanage, or worse, the street." The elderly woman fixed her honey eyes on Richard's. "Look at me, Rod. I don't want your money from me. I don't want hospitals or medicines that only prolong the agony. I want a promise, but this time a man's promise, one that won't break with time." Richard nodded frantically, taking Rose's hands in his. "Anything. Ask me anything. I'll give you my entire fortune. I'll give you my house." "I don't want your house," Rose whispered, her voice growing fainter like a candle burning out. "I want you to take care of her, not let the world consume her. Give her the chance you had. Swear it." "I swear it," Richard said with a firm, solemn voice. "By my life, Rose, I swear it. She will never be hungry again. She will never be cold again. She will be like my own blood." Ethan, who had remained silent by the plastic door, approached slowly. He knelt beside his father, saying nothing, but placed his small hand on Richard's shoulder. It was a gesture of support, of validation. His father, for the first time, was a real hero in his eyes. "Grandma, I'm scared," Lily sobbed, dropping the stick and running to hug the elderly woman. She huddled against Rose's skeletal chest, seeking protection where there were only bones and skin. "Don't go. Don't leave me with him. I don't know him." "Shh, my child." Rose stroked Lily's dirty hair. "He's good. He was just a little lost. But he found himself. He came home." Suddenly, Grandma Rose's body stiffened. Her eyes widened disproportionately, staring at a fixed point on the rusted tin roof. A violent retch shook her. "Grandma!" Lily cried. Grandma Rose began to cough, but it wasn't a normal cough. It was a wet, tearing sound. Dark blood seeped from her lips, staining the gray pillow. Her breathing became an agonizing whistle, quick and shallow, from words to deeds. Panic erupted in the small room like a grenade. "Rose, Rose, breathe!" Richard shouted, sitting up abruptly. He supported her shoulders, trying to ease her breathing. But the elderly woman was choking on her own fluids. "Dad, do something!" Ethan cried, terrified. "Water! Get water!" Richard ordered Lily, though he knew water would be useless. Lily ran to a half-empty plastic bottle in the corner, but her hands trembled so much she dropped it. The water spilled onto the dirt floor, creating instant mud. "No!" the girl cried. "Grandma, don't die!" Richard pulled his cell phone from his inner jacket pocket. His fingers slipped on the touchscreen, stained with Rose's blood. He dialed emergency services desperately. "Come on, answer! Please!" he yelled into the phone. The signal was weak. One bar, sometimes none. They were in a city black hole, a place where even cell waves didn't want to enter. Finally, the call connected. Emergency. I need an ambulance now!" Richard shouted, interrupting the operator. "I have an elderly woman. Severe respiratory failure. She's coughing blood. She's dying. She's dying now. Calm down, sir. Give me the exact address." "I don't know the exact address. It's the encampment behind the North Big Box Grocer." Entering through the alley of the abandoned factory, at the end of the dirt path, there was a silence on the other end of the line. A bureaucratic, cold, deadly silence. "Sir, that's a high-risk zone," the operator said in a monotone voice. "Ambulances cannot enter there without police escort. Safety protocol indicates that we must wait for a patrol to secure the perimeter before entering." Richard felt his blood boil in his temples. "Protocol? She's dying." "I'm Richard Thompson. I have money. I'll pay anything. Send a helicopter if necessary." "Sir, it doesn't matter who you are. We cannot risk medical personnel. You must wait for the police. Estimated arrival time is 40 minutes. In 40 minutes, she'll be dead." Richard roared and smashed the phone against the tin wall. The $1,000 device shattered and fell to the ground, useless. Silence returned to the room, broken only by Rose's agonizing gurgles. Her eyes were glazing over. Her hand, still holding Lily's, was losing strength. Richard looked around. He was alone. His money was useless. His influence was useless. His name was useless. In that 133-square-foot room full of misery, only his hands and his will mattered. He looked at Ethan. The boy was pale, but not crying. He looked at his father, expecting a solution. "Ethan," Richard said with an strangely calm voice, that icy calm that precedes extreme action. "Take Lily's hand. Don't let go." "Yes, Dad." Richard took off his Italian designer suit jacket, throwing it on the ground over the mud and blood without looking at it. He rolled up his immaculate white shirt sleeves to his elbows. He leaned over Grandma Rose. "Rose, you're not going to die here," he whispered in her ear. "Not in this hole. I promised you. You're going to have a clean bed. You're going to have air. Hold on a little longer." With a fluid movement, Richard slipped his arms under the elderly woman's legs and back. She was light, painfully light, like a bird made of hollow bones. As he lifted her, Rose's head fell back, inert. "Let's go!" Richard shouted to the children. He left the shack carrying Rose in his arms. The sunlight in the alley blinded him for an instant. "Run to the car," he ordered. The scene was surreal. A man dressed in business clothes, stained with blood and dirt, running through a filthy alley with a dying elderly woman in his arms, followed by two children, one dressed in a private school uniform and the other in rags. The neighborhood woke up. People came out of the other shacks upon hearing the screams. Men with hard gazes, women with children in their arms. Some blocked the way, curious or threatening. In that neighborhood, a man in a suit usually meant trouble, evictions, police, or debts. A young man with tattoos on his neck stood in Richard's path. "Where are you taking her, boss? What did you do to the old lady?" Richard didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He fixed his blue eyes on the young man's with a murderous intensity. "Get out of the way or I'll kill you," Richard roared. It wasn't an empty threat. It was the voice of an animal protecting its pack. Desperation gave him an aura of danger that money had never given him. The young man saw something in Richard's eyes. He saw madness, he saw truth, and he stepped aside. "Clear the way!" the young man yelled to the others. "He's taking Grandma to the hospital." The Red Sea of poverty parted. People moved aside. Richard ran. His lungs burned. His arms, accustomed to lifting weights at the gym, began to ache, not from the weight, but from the tension. Rose coughed against his chest, staining his white shirt bright red. "We're almost there, Rose, we're almost there," Richard gasped. They emerged from the alley onto the main avenue. The sun beat down on the asphalt. Richard's car, an armored black sedan, was haphazardly parked on the curb, hazard lights flashing, just as he had left it. "Ethan, open the back door," he shouted. The boy ran ahead and pulled the handle. Richard gently placed Rose in the cream leather seats with exquisite care, not caring about ruining the thousands of dollars of upholstery. "Get in quickly!" Lily hesitated. She looked at the gleaming car, then at her dirty clothes. "I'll make it dirty," she murmured, conditioned by years of rejection. Richard grabbed her arm and almost forced her into the car, seating her next to her grandma. "I don't care about the car, get in," he yelled, closing the door. Richard jumped into the driver's seat. The engine roared with 400 horsepower. He looked in the rearview mirror. Rose was pale, her eyes closed. Lily was crying silently, holding her grandma's hand. Ethan held the other hand. "Don't fall asleep, Rose," Richard said, putting it in first gear and pressing the accelerator to the floor. "Talk to her, Lily. Talk to her. Don't let her fall asleep." The car screeched its tires, leaving black marks on the pavement, and shot into traffic, dodging cars and running the first red light. Richard gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He wasn't going to the nearest public hospital. He was going to the International Medical Center, the city's most expensive and exclusive hospital, where he was a shareholder. "You're going to live, you stubborn old woman," Richard muttered, tears streaming down his face mixing with sweat. "You're going to live to see me keep my promise, even if I have to buy the devil's soul." As he drove like a getaway driver, dodging honks and insults from other drivers, Richard felt a small hand touch his shoulder from the back seat. It was Ethan. "Dad," the boy said, his voice trembling but full of pride. "You're brave." That sentence, coming from his son, was worth more than all the corporate mergers of his career. But Richard couldn't enjoy it. The sound of Rose's breathing was growing weaker. "Pray, Ethan," Richard ordered, his voice breaking. "Pray everything you know, because we need a miracle." The car accelerated even more, becoming a black metal bullet, cutting through the city's indifference, carrying inside it the most valuable cargo Richard had ever transported. A life that had no market price, the glass wall. The interior of the luxury sedan became a capsule of anguish at 120 kilometers per hour. The outside world was just a blur of lights and concrete flying past the tinted windows. Inside, the dominant sound was not the German-engineered engine, but the raspy, agonizing wheezing of Grandma Rose's lungs, fighting for one more breath of air. "Hold on, Rose, don't you dare close your eyes," Richard shouted, checking the rearview mirror every 3 seconds. His hands gripped the steering wheel with such force that the leather creaked. He ran another red light, dodging a delivery truck by millimeters, which honked furiously at him. In the back seat, the scene was heartbreaking. Lily, small and terrified, held her grandma's head on her lap. Her tears fell onto the old woman's wrinkled face, mixing with dirt and sweat. "Grandma, wake up, please," the girl sobbed, caressing Rose's cold cheek. "Look, we're in a carriage like in the stories. We're going to the castle where they'll cure you." Ethan, sitting on the other side, held Rose's hand. The boy, accustomed to a world where everything was solved with a call or a card, was facing the absolute fragility of life for the first time. "Dad, her hand is really cold," Ethan said, his voice trembling with panic. "Dad, she's getting cold." "We're almost there. Please, we're almost there," Richard roared, sharply turning the wheel to the right. The car skidded as it entered the access ramp of the Metropolitan Sanatorium Hospital, a fortress of glass and steel reserved for the city's elite. There were no waiting lines or plastic chairs. There were water fountains, valet parking, and silence. Richard braked sharply right in front of the main revolving door, ignoring the designated ambulance zone on the side. The screech of the tires made 2 security guards and a valet in a red vest jump from their posts. "Sir, you cannot park here," the valet shouted, running towards the car with an annoyed gesture. "This is the executive entrance. Move your vehicle immediately, or we will call for a tow." Richard didn't wait. He kicked open the door and got out. His appearance was terrifying. A $1,000 suit ruined, his white shirt drenched in dark blood on his chest and arms, his hair disheveled, and his eyes wide with adrenaline. "I need a stretcher now!" Richard roared, running to the back door to get Rose out. The valet recoiled, scared by the blood. "Sir, what happened to you?" "Was there an accident?" the employee stammered. Richard opened the back door. The smell of sickness and misery escaped from the car's climate-controlled interior, clashing with the hospital's aseptic air. He took Rose out in his arms. The elderly woman was inert. Her head hung back like a broken doll. Her old, dirty clothes contrasted violently with the luxurious surroundings. Lily and Ethan got out of the car, running to follow Richard. A security guard, a burly man in a tactical uniform, blocked the way to the automatic glass doors. "Stop right there," the guard said, raising one hand and placing the other on his baton. "Sir, you cannot enter with that person here. This is a private hospital. The public hospital is 20 blocks away. I suggest you." Blind fury overcame Richard. He had no time for classist bureaucracy. "Get out of my way," Richard shouted without stopping. "Sir, stop!" The guard tried to physically block him, grabbing Richard by the shoulder. "Hygiene and safety regulations. That woman is homeless. She cannot." Richard reacted with primitive violence. Using the momentum of his run, he slammed into the guard with his shoulder, knocking him to the ground. The man fell with a thud, surprised. "Nobody touches me," Richard roared, regaining his balance without letting go of Rose. The glass doors opened. Richard burst into the lobby. The contrast was brutal. The lobby was an immense space, with white marble floors, soft classical music, and air conditioning with a subtle scent. There were people sitting on leather armchairs checking their phones, ladies with jewels waiting for cosmetic surgery results. Everyone froze. They saw a blood-stained man enter, carrying a human bundle wrapped in rags, followed by 2 crying children and a security guard getting up from the floor outside. The silence was broken by murmurs of horror. "A doctor!" Richard's cry resonated in the vaulted ceiling, echoing like a cannon shot. "She's dying! Someone help me!" An immaculate receptionist, behind a granite counter, stood up, pale, adjusting her glasses. "Sir, please lower your voice. You're scaring the patients," she said, trying to maintain composure. "You must go to the emergency room through the side entrance and fill out admission and medical insurance forms." Richard reached the counter, gasping. He carefully placed Rose on one of the beige velvet waiting armchairs, instantly staining it with mud and fluids. People around stepped back in disgust, covering their noses. "I'm not filling out any damn papers," Richard said, leaning over the counter, his face centimeters from the receptionist's. His blue eyes burned. "She's not breathing properly. I need the on-duty chief. Now." "Sir, without medical insurance or a prior deposit, we cannot admit homeless individuals," the receptionist insisted, looking disdainfully at Rose and then at Lily, who trembled beside the armchair. "This is not a charity hospital." Lily shrank. She knew that look. It was the same as the supermarket cashier's, the look that said, "You are worthless here." Richard slammed his fist on the counter, making pens and the computer jump. The sound was like a gunshot. "Listen to me carefully," Richard shouted, his voice radiating power and threat. "I am Richard Thompson. I own the construction company that built the north wing of this building. I know the CEO. I play golf with him on Sundays. If that woman is not in an intensive care unit in the next 60 seconds, I swear to God, I will buy this hospital just to demolish it with you inside. Did I make myself clear?" The receptionist swallowed hard. The name Thompson. She recognized it. She looked at the ruined suit, the watch on his wrist that was worth more than her 5-year salary. Fear changed sides. "Code blue in the lobby!" the woman shouted into the phone, her voice trembling. "Trauma team to the lobby, immediately. VIP patient." "She's not a VIP, Richard corrected, turning to Rose and taking her cold hand. "She's my family." The double doors at the back burst open. A team of doctors and nurses in blue scrubs ran towards them, pushing a high-tech stretcher. The organized chaos of modern medicine engulfed the scene. "What do we have?" asked the lead doctor, a gray-haired man with authority, as he helped Richard transfer Rose to the stretcher. "Female, approx. 70 years old. Severe malnutrition, coughing blood. I think it's advanced pneumonia or tuberculosis. Lost consciousness 3 minutes ago," Richard recited, surprised by the clarity of his own report. "Oxygen, IV line," the doctor ordered. "Take her to Trauma 1. The stretcher began to move quickly. "Grandma!" Lily cried, trying to run after the stretcher. A nurse gently stopped her. "You can't go through, sweetie. You have to wait here." Lily struggled, but she was weak. She watched as the swinging doors swallowed the only person in the world who loved her. The stretcher disappeared. Richard stood in the middle of the lobby, his arms hanging at his sides, stained with dried blood. His ragged breathing was the only sound. People looked at him, but no one dared to say anything anymore. The supermarket monster had transformed into something they couldn't comprehend. Ethan approached Lily, who was crying silently, and put his arm around her shoulders. "My dad will save her," the boy said with conviction. "He always wins." Richard turned and looked at the two children. He saw the mix of mud and tears on their faces. He felt the weight of 30 years of selfishness falling on his shoulders. No, he didn't always win. In fact, he had just realized that he had been losing for decades, the thread that never broke. Time in a hospital is not measured in minutes, but in heartbeats. 2 hours had passed. Richard hadn't moved from the private waiting room they had moved them to after the incident in the lobby. He hadn't washed. He hadn't changed. He was still in his blood-stained shirt, sitting on a leather sofa, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Ethan and Lily sat across from him. A kind nurse had brought them juice and sandwiches. Lily ate with a heartbreaking voracity, devouring every crumb as if fearing someone would take it away. Ethan, on the other hand, hadn't touched his food. He just watched the girl, pushing his own plate towards her when she finished hers. Richard looked up and observed Lily. Now, in the calmer light, he could see the details. She had the same eyes Rose had when she was young, that mix of sweetness and steel. "Lily," Richard said. His voice sounded hoarse, exhausted. The girl stopped with the sandwich halfway to her mouth. She lowered her gaze, scared. The supermarket trauma was still latent. For her, this man was still dangerous, even if he had brought them there. "Tell me." Richard searched for the words, trying to be gentle. "The bracelet. Why did your grandma give it to you? What did she tell you when she put it on you?" Lily swallowed the bite with difficulty. She wiped her mouth with the back of her dirty hand. "She gave it to me when Mom died," she said softly. "She said it was so I wouldn't feel alone." Lily reached into her pocket. The dress she was wearing had large patched pockets, and she pulled out the red thread bracelet Richard had tried to snatch from her in the supermarket. She held it in the palm of her hand like a sacred offering. "She told me a story," the girl continued, looking at the weaving. "She said a long time ago there was a boy who lived next door to her house, a boy who was always sad because his parents didn't love him. She said she made him a bracelet just like this one to tie him to life, because the boy wanted to leave, he wanted to disappear." Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. He remembered that night. He was 8 years old. He was sitting on the curb in the rain, determined to run away from home, to run until his legs gave out and let himself freeze to death. Rose found him, took him to her shack, gave him cinnamon tea, and wove him the bracelet. "As long as you wear this, you're tied to me, Rod, and I won't let you go, so you can't leave." She told me, Lily's voice trembled, that the boy left one day in a big black car, that they took him far away to be a prince, but that she knew he would come back. That's why she wove. "She wove?" Richard asked, confused. "Did she make more bracelets?" "Yes, many, every night," Lily nodded. "When we didn't have enough to eat, she sold everything. She sold her wedding ring, she sold the old television, she sold her bed, but she never sold the red bracelets. She kept them in a shoebox. She would say, 'These are for when Rod comes back, so he knows I was waiting for him.'" Richard covered his mouth with his hand to stifle a sob. "It can't be." But Lily lowered her voice, ashamed. "Last week, when she got really sick and we didn't even have money for water, she took out the box. She cried a lot and went to the market and sold them all of them, except this one, which is mine." "She sold them?" Richard asked, with a lump in his throat. "Yes. She bought medicine because I had a bad cough. She cured me, but she was left with nothing." Lily looked up at Richard, her eyes full of tears. "She sold her memories of you to save me. She loved you very much, sir, more than anyone. She always said, 'Rod is good, Rod will come.'" The weight of the revelation crushed Richard. Rose had not only saved him in the past, she had sacrificed the symbol of her hope, her emotional connection to him, to save her granddaughter. She had given up her treasure to give life. And meanwhile, he had been buying watches, yachts, and despising people like her in supermarkets. The magnitude of his own moral misery became evident. He was the poor one. He was the spiritually destitute one. That woman dying in a hospital bed without a penny was the real millionaire. "Forgive me, God," Richard whispered, closing his eyes. Ethan got up and walked towards his father. "Dad," the boy said, "you're to blame for her being sick, aren't you?" The question was direct, brutal, unfiltered. Richard opened his eyes and looked at his son. He could have lied. He could have said no, that life is like that poverty is complex. But he looked into Ethan's eyes and knew that this was the defining moment of his fatherhood. "Yes, son," Richard said in a firm but broken voice. "I'm to blame, because I could have come back years ago, because I have all this money and I let the person who saved my life live in the slums. I'm to blame for being blind." Ethan nodded, processing the information with the seriousness of an adult. "Then you have to fix it," the boy said. "Not just with money. You have to really fix it." "I will, Ethan, I swear." At that moment, the door to the waiting room opened. The gray-haired doctor entered. His face was serious, unreadable. He took off his surgical mask and sighed. Richard jumped to his feet, his heart pounding in his throat. Lily stood up too, clutching instinctively at Richard's trouser leg. "Doctor," Richard said, fearing the worst. "How is she? Tell me the truth." The doctor looked at Richard, then at the children. "Mr. Thompson, the patient arrived in critical condition, bilateral pneumonia, severe dehydration, and an alarming case of anemia. Her heart is very weak. She has suffered too much wear and tear for a woman her age." "Don't give me diagnosis," Richard interrupted, desperate. "Tell me if she's going to live." The doctor paused, measuring his words. "We stabilized her. She's in an induced coma, so her body can rest. But the next 12 hours are crucial. If she makes it through the night, there's hope. But I must be honest, her will to live seems exhausted. Clinically, we've done everything. Now it depends on her and whether she has a reason to stay in this world." Richard felt his knees tremble, but he remained standing. "She has a reason," Richard said, looking at Lily and then clenching his fist. "She has too, and I'm going to make sure to remind her." Richard turned to the doctor. "I want to go in now." "Sir, she's in the ICU. It's restricted." "I don't care. I'm going in. I need to talk to her. I need to tell her I kept my promise. She needs to hear my voice to know that waiting 30 years wasn't in vain." The doctor saw the determination in Richard's eyes. It wasn't the arrogance of money. This time, it was the desperation of love. "All right, 5 minutes. Just you." Richard looked at Ethan. "Take care of Lily. Don't let her go." "Never," Ethan replied, taking the girl's hand. Richard walked towards the double doors. He was going to fight the most important battle of his life. Not in a boardroom, but beside a hospital bed, trying to convince a dying elderly woman that life, despite all the pain he had caused her, was still worth living. The room of whispers. The sound inside the intensive care unit was not human. It was a digital symphony, cold and rhythmic. Beep, beep. Each beep was a reminder that Grandma Rose's life hung by a thread as thin as the one she used to weave her bracelets. Richard entered the glass cubicle. The air inside was sterilized, cold, odorless, a violent contrast to the human warmth and the smell of damp earth from the alley he had taken her from just hours earlier. He approached the bed. Grandma Rose seemed even smaller among the hospital's white sheets. She was connected to tubes and wires that monitored every beat of her tired heart. A ventilator covered her mouth and nose, inflating her chest with a mechanical rhythm she could no longer sustain herself. Richard dragged a metal chair and sat down heavily. He didn't care that his once immaculate shirt was stiff with dried blood and mud. He leaned towards her, afraid to touch her, afraid to break her. "Rose," he whispered. His voice sounded strange in the clinical silence. "It's me. It's the ungrateful one." No one responded. Only the monitor's beep. Richard extended his hand and took hers. It was cold, full of age spots and old scars. Scars from stove burns, paper cuts, sewing needles. These were the hands of a woman who had fought every day of her life so others could eat. "I lied to you out there," Richard continued, speaking with the urgency of someone confessing before an execution. "I didn't forget you because of work. I didn't forget because I was busy." Richard squeezed the inert hand, fixing his gaze on the elderly woman's closed eyelids, hoping to see them tremble. "I forgot you because I was ashamed," he confessed, and the words came out like broken glass from his throat. "When I was adopted, when I entered that world of private schools and houses with pools, I wanted to erase everything I was. I hated remembering the hunger. I hated remembering the cold. And you were the living memory of my poverty. So I buried you in my memory to feel like a prince." Tears welled up again, hot and silent. "I was a coward, Rose. I thought money would clean me. I thought if I wore expensive suits, no one would see the dirty kid from the alley. But today, my son, a 7-year-old boy, had more courage than I have had in my entire life. He saw you. I only saw an obstacle." Richard rested his forehead on the edge of the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. "Don't die, please. Don't leave me with this debt. Don't let me be the villain of your story. Wake up and yell at me, wake up and hit me. But don't leave in silence. I need you to see that I can change. I need you to see that Rod is still here beneath all this garbage I put on myself." Suddenly, a change in the monitor's rhythm made Richard lift his head abruptly. The beep accelerated slightly. Richard looked at Rose's face. Her eyes didn't open. There was no movie-like movement, but in the hand he held, he felt something. A slight, almost imperceptible pressure, like the flutter of a dying butterfly. It wasn't a strong squeeze. It was just a spasm, perhaps a nervous reflex, or perhaps, just perhaps, it was her telling him she heard. "Rose?" he asked, his heart pounding. The pressure didn't repeat. The heart rate returned to its slow, dangerous cadence. But for Richard, it was enough. It was a spark in the darkness. "I promise you one thing, old woman," Richard said, angrily wiping away his tears, transforming pain into steel resolve. "Lily isn't going to be a statistic. She isn't going to be the poor child. From today on, that girl is sacred to me. If I have to burn down my company to give her a future, I'll burn it. If I have to kneel before the whole world, I'll kneel. But she's going to have the life you dreamed for me. And this time, I won't fail." Richard stood up. He was no longer the man who had entered. Something had broken inside him, but it was a necessary break, like when a poorly healed bone is rebroken so it can mend correctly. He kissed Rose's cold forehead and turned around. He had a mission, and he had enemies to face. But this time, the enemies were not poverty or hunger. The enemy was his own former life, the price of redemption. Stepping out of the ICU, the hallway was dimly lit. Only emergency lights and the glow of vending machines illuminated the waiting area. There they were. Ethan had fallen asleep on the synthetic leather sofa, his head resting on Lily's lap. And Lily, she wasn't sleeping. She sat upright, stiff, her eyes wide open, guarding the rich boy's sleep like a soldier. She gently caressed Ethan's hair, humming an inaudible melody, the same one Rose had surely sung to her. The image struck Richard two worlds that were supposed to be enemies, united by innocence, the boy who had everything, and the girl who had nothing, sleeping together under the neon light. There were no prejudices there, no social classes, just two scared children seeking warmth. Richard approached slowly. The sound of his hard-soled shoes echoed in the hallway, and Lily immediately looked up, startled, protecting Ethan with her arms. "Quiet," Richard said, raising his hands. "It's me." Lily relaxed her shoulders but didn't take her eyes off Richard's. She was looking for answers. "She?" the girl asked in a whisper, fearing to finish the sentence. "She's fighting," Richard replied, sitting on the floor in front of them to be at their eye level. He didn't want to look down at her ever again. "Your grandma is the strongest woman I've ever known. She's resting." Lily nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Are they going to kick us out?" she asked suddenly. "What?" Richard frowned. "From the hospital," Lily clarified, looking around. "The nurses look at us badly. They say we smell of the streets, and my clothes are dirty. They always kick us out of nice places." The brutal innocence of the question hurt Richard more than a punch. "No one is going to kick you out," he said firmly. "This is my hospital. Well, a part of it, and you are my honored guest. If anyone looks at you funny, you tell me." At that moment, the silence of the hallway was violated by a shrill sound. Richard's phone, which had survived in his inner pocket, recovered by staff from the alley floor and returned to him, broken but functional, began to vibrate and ring. Richard took it out. The screen was cracked, but the name was clearly visible. Mark, senior partner. It was the call he had been dreading and expecting, the merger meeting, the $50 million deal he was supposed to close that afternoon, the reason he had been in such a hurry at the supermarket. Richard looked at the phone, then at Lily with her broken shoes and her eyes full of fear. He looked at Ethan, sleeping trustingly. He answered, "Richard, where on earth are you?" Mark's voice yelled from the other end, hysterical. "The Japanese investors have been waiting for 2 hours. They're furious. They're going to leave. We're losing the deal of the century. Tell me you're on your way." Richard listened to the shouting. 5 hours ago, that call would have made him break out in a cold sweat. He would have invented lies. He would have rushed. He would have killed to get to that boardroom. Now Mark's voice sounded ridiculous, distant, like the buzzing of an annoying fly. "I'm not coming, Mark," Richard said with a calm that chilled his partner's blood. "What? Are you crazy? It's the merger. It's your career. If you don't show up in 20 minutes, They're going to sue you for breach of contract. They're going to destroy you, Richard. You'll lose millions." Richard looked at his hands, stained with dried blood. Rose's blood. "Listen to me, Mark," Richard said, lowering his voice so as not to wake Ethan, but with a tone that cut like a scalpel. "Let them leave. Let them take their money. Let them take the contract. I don't care. But what's wrong with you? Are you drunk?" "No, I'm awake for the first time in years. I'm awake." Richard stood up and walked a few steps away from the children towards the window overlooking the illuminated city. "Cancel the meeting. Cancel the gala dinner. And tell the lawyers to prepare the papers to liquidate my shares in the Southern subsidiary. Richard, this is professional suicide." "No, Mark, this is a rescue. I'm busy saving something priceless. Don't call me again today." Richard hung up and then did something definitive. He turned off the phone. He stood looking at the black device in his hand. It was his shackle, his connection to the world of vanity. He returned to the children. Ethan was starting to wake up, rubbing his eyes. "Dad," the sleepy boy asked, "did we win yet?" Richard smiled. A sad, but genuine smile. The first real one in a long time. "Not yet, champ, but we've stopped losing." He knelt in front of Lily. The girl looked at him curiously. She had heard the conversation, although she didn't understand mergers or shares. She understood the tone. She understood that this man had just said no to something important to be there. "Lily," Richard said, looking her in the eyes, "I know you're scared. I know I'm a stranger who treated you badly, and I'll spend the rest of my life apologizing for that, but I need you to know something." Richard pointed towards the ICU door. "Your grandma is going to get better. The doctors are magicians, but when she wakes up, you're never going back to that alley again." Lily frowned, confused. "But we don't have a home. The landlord said, if we didn't pay today." "It doesn't matter what the landlord said," Richard interrupted. "Listen to me. You have family, maybe not by blood, but blood is the least important thing sometimes. Your grandma was like a mother to me. That makes you." Richard searched for the right word and found it in his son's heart. "That makes us family." Richard pulled out his wallet, not taking out money. He took out a simple white business card. He flipped it over and wrote a landline phone number with a borrowed nurse's pen. "I'm not going to give you money to leave," he said. "I'm going to give you a home, you and Rose. Ethan always wanted a sister, and I need to learn to be human again, and I think only you can teach me." Lily looked at the card, then at Richard. Her eyes filled with tears. No one had ever offered her a home. They had offered her coins, scraps, old clothes, but never a place to stay. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice broken. "Or is it like the story of the prince who left?" "The prince was an idiot," Richard said forcefully. "But the man who is here isn't leaving. I give you my word of honor, and this time I seal it with this." Richard extended his hand, not to give, but to ask, "Will you let me see the bracelet again?" Lily hesitated for a second, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the red thread. She handed it to him. Richard didn't put it on himself. He took Lily's wrist, small and fragile, and with extreme delicacy, retied the bracelet on the girl's arm. "This isn't just a thread, Lily, it's a promise. As long as you wear this, no one will hurt you. I will be your shield." Ethan joined the moment, placing his hand on his father's and Lily's. "And me too," the boy said. At that instant, the ICU door burst open. A nurse ran out, her face pale. Doctor, come quickly," she shouted down the hallway. "The patient in bed 4 is going into cardiac arrest." The world stopped again. The monitor's sound, which had been rhythmic, turned into a continuous, sharp beep that pierced the glass walls. Beep. Richard felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "No!" he cried, getting up and running towards the glass door, forgetting all his promises of calm. "Grandma!" Lily's cry was a howl of pure pain that echoed throughout the hospital. The medical team rushed to Rose's bed. Richard reached the glass and pounded on it with open palms, powerless, watching them charge the defibrillator paddles. Charging to 200. Clear. Rose's body jumped on the bed with the electric shock. Still no rhythm. Charging to 300. Richard remained glued to the glass, watching as his only chance at redemption slipped through his fingers. Ethan hugged Lily, who covered her ears and closed her eyes, refusing to see the end of her world. "Come on, Rose, fight!" Richard cried against the glass with tears of rage. "Don't you dare leave now! Not now!" The miracle of empty hands. The continuous beep of the cardiac monitor, that sharp, monotonous sound that announces the end of an existence, filled the room like a poisonous gas. Pee. For the doctors, it was a technical sound, a signal to initiate protocols. For Lily, it was the sound of her world collapsing. The girl covered her ears so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She curled into a ball on the hallway floor and began to scream. A silent cry choked in her throat, refusing to accept that the only light in her life was extinguishing. Inside the glass cubicle, the chaos was choreographed. "Charging to 300 joules, the lead doctor shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Everyone out! Clear!" Grandma Rose's fragile body arched violently on the stretcher with the impact of the electrical discharge. She fell back, inert, like an abandoned rag doll. Richard, on the other side of the glass, pounded on the glass with a clenched fist. He felt no pain in his hand, only a desperation that burned his insides. "Don't go, Rose," he roared, his voice distorted by the thick glass. "You don't have permission to leave." The doctor looked at the monitor. The green line remained flat, a straight road to death. "No response," a nurse said in a tense voice. "Doctor, she's been in asystole for 2 minutes. Saturation is on the floor." "Come on, one more," the doctor ordered, though his eyes already showed resignation. "Epinephrine, 1 milligram, charging to 360. Richard couldn't bear it anymore. Logic, rules, civilization, everything disappeared. He watched them charge the paddles again and felt as if they were electrocuting his own soul. He pushed open the ICU door and entered. "Sir, you can't be in here," a nurse shouted, trying to block his path. Richard didn't even look at her. He swept past her like a freight train, ignoring sterility protocols. He reached the bedside just as the doctor was about to apply the paddles. "Wait," Richard shouted, grabbing the bed rail. "Get him out of here! Security!" the doctor yelled. "We're losing the patient. She hears me." Richard leaned over Rose's ear, ignoring the chaos around him, ignoring the death that floated in the air. He took the elderly woman's hand, that cold, calloused hand, and squeezed it with both of his. "Rose, listen to me. It's Rod." The monitor kept beeping. "P. You can't leave her alone," Richard whispered, his voice broken by tears, speaking directly to the spirit of the woman who had loved him when no one else did. "Lily is outside. She's terrified. If you leave now, you condemn her. If you leave now, you break your promise. Sir, please." The doctor lowered the paddles, looking at the wall clock. He was about to declare the time of death. "No!" Richard looked at the doctor with crazy eyes. "Give me a second!" He looked at Rose again. He got so close that his tears fell on the elderly woman's waxy face. "Mom." The word came out of his mouth without him thinking. He had never called his adoptive mother that, only her. "Mom, please come back. I swear I'll be the man you wanted. I swear I'll take care of her, but I need you to help me. Fight, stubborn old woman, fight." Richard squeezed her hand hard, transmitting all his energy, all his vitality, all his regret through that contact. And then it happened. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a sound. Beep. The continuous beep was cut for a fraction of a second. The doctor looked up sharply at the monitor. Beep. Beep. The flatline made a jump. A small green mountain appeared on the screen, followed by another. Weak, irregular, but present. A deathly silence fell over the room. The nurses froze. The doctor exhaled the air he had been holding. "We have a rhythm," the doctor whispered, incredulous. "Sinus rhythm, bradycardia, but it's there." Richard let out a breath and fell to his knees beside the bed, sobbing, burying his face in the sheets. He felt as if his heart had been ripped out and put back in. "Stabilize the pressure," the doctor ordered, regaining professional control, but looking at Richard with a mixture of respect and awe. "Dopamine continuous infusion. We're going to keep her here." Richard lifted his head, looked at Rose. Her chest was moving, aided by the machine, but her heart was beating on its own. She had returned. She had come back from the edge of the abyss because someone had called her by name. Richard stood up, staggering. He had to go out. He had to tell them. He went out into the hallway. He was dizzy, exhausted, as if he had run a marathon. Lily and Ethan were hugging on the floor. Seeing Richard come out, Lily stiffened, preparing for the final blow, for the news that would end her life. Richard sank to the floor beside them. He didn't care about his suit. He didn't care about his image. He was at their eye level. He looked at Lily. The girl was trembling so much that her teeth chattered. "She's alive," Richard said. Just 2 words. Lily stopped breathing for a second. "What?" she whispered, unable to process the hope. "She's alive, Lily," Richard repeated, and a tired but luminous smile broke the mask of pain on his face. "Your grandma is iron. She came back. She stayed with us." Lily looked into Richard's eyes, searching for a lie, searching for deception, but she only saw truth. She saw the red eyes of a man who had cried. The girl let out a cry that was not of pain, but of liberation. And then she did something Richard didn't expect. She lunged towards him. Lily wrapped her thin, dirty arms around Richard's neck and buried her face in the man's chest, staining his blood-stained shirt with fresh tears. "Thank you. Thank you," she sobbed. Richard froze for an instant. The physical contact with the girl from the supermarket, the girl he had despised hours earlier, disarmed him. He felt the small, fragile body shake against his. Slowly, awkwardly, Richard wrapped his large arms around the girl, held her close, closed his eyes, and rested his chin on Lily's dirty head. "Don't thank me," he whispered. "Forgive me." Ethan joined the embrace. The three formed a human sculpture on the cold hospital floor, an emotionally ruined millionaire, a boy discovering reality, and a girl regaining hope. In that embrace, bank accounts and rags ceased to exist. There were only three hearts beating at the same rhythm of survival. The wall of bureaucracy. 2 days later, the morning sunlight streamed through the window of private room 405. It wasn't a normal hospital room. It looked like a hotel suite. There were fresh flowers on the nightstand, Egyptian cotton sheets, and a sofa bed where Richard had spent the last 48 hours sleeping in snatches, refusing to go home. Grandma Rose was awake. Weak, yes, but awake. She no longer had the tube in her throat, only a transparent oxygen mask. Lily was sitting on the bed, carefully brushing her grandma's white hair. The girl was transformed. She no longer wore the rags from the supermarket. She wore a simple, clean blue dress and new shoes that Ethan had personally chosen at the hospital shop. Richard stood by the window, talking on a new phone his assistant had brought him. His posture was tense. "I told you to sell the shares, Mark," Richard said in a low but firm voice. "I don't care if the price dropped. I need liquidity. Now I want to buy the land in the northern encampment. Yes, all the land. Not to build a shopping center, you idiot. To clean it up, to develop it. No, I'm not going to evict anyone. I'm going to give them deeds. Do it." He hung up the phone, turned to the bed, and his face softened as he saw Rose smile at Lily. "You look better, Rose," Richard said, approaching. "I feel like I've been hit by a truck and then given a massage," she joked in a raspy voice. "Rod, this is too much. This room, the nurses who come every 5 minutes, you're going to go broke. I have a lot of money, Rose. Too much. And for the first time, I know what to spend it on," he replied, taking her hand. At that moment, the room door opened without knocking. It wasn't a nurse. It was a woman in her 50s, dressed in a severe gray suit, with a folder under her arm and an expression of bureaucratic efficiency that chilled the blood. Behind her, 2 hospital security guards. Lily stopped brushing her grandma's hair. Street instinct told her this woman was dangerous. She clung to Rose's side. "Good morning," the woman said without smiling. "I'm Miss Davidson from the Department of Child and Family Services." Richard straightened, instinctively placing himself between the woman and the bed. "I don't recall calling you," Richard said dryly. "The hospital reported the admission of a minor at risk accompanying an indigent patient in critical condition," the woman said, opening her folder and pulling out a pen. "We have reviewed the case. Mess. Rosemary Smith has no fixed address, no verifiable income, and her health is precarious." The woman looked at Lily over her glasses. "The child is not schooled, shows signs of chronic malnutrition, and lives in unsanitary conditions. The state assumes immediate custody." Lily let out a whimper and grabbed her grandma's arm. Rose tried to sit up, but she was too weak. "No," Rose said in a choked voice. "Don't take her. She's my granddaughter." "Madam, you can't even take care of yourself, miss," Davidson retorted coldly. "The child will be transferred to Provincial Children's Home No. 4 until her legal situation is determined. Officers, please proceed." The 2 guards stepped forward. Lily started crying, terrified. "Richard!" the girl cried, looking at the man who had promised to be her shield. Richard felt a cold fury rise up his spine. It wasn't the impulsive fury of the supermarket. It was the calculating fury of a man who knows he has power and is willing to use it. "Stop." Richard's voice cracked like a whip. The guard stopped. Miss Davidson looked at him with annoyance. "Sir, do not interfere. This is a legal procedure. If you obstruct authority..." Richard walked slowly towards her, invading her personal space. He was tall, imposing, and even though he was in casual clothes, he emanated an authority that made the official step back. "You are not taking anyone," Richard said with terrifying calm. "Listen carefully, Miss Davidson. You say Miss. Smith has no address. That is false. Her address is 450 Oakdale Avenue, Thompson Manor. It is my residence. The woman blinked, confused. What are you saying? I'm saying that Miss Rosemary is my adoptive mother, Richard lied with perfect fluency. And the child Lily is under my direct protection. That is not in any document, Miss Davidson stammered, looking at her papers. Here it says they were found in an irregular encampment. An administrative error that my lawyers are already correcting, Richard interrupted. In fact, my lawyer is on his way with temporary custody documents signed by Grandma, granting me legal guardianship of the minor and medical responsibility for Miss Smith. Richard pulled out his wallet and extracted a card. And I suggest, Miss Davidson, that before you try to touch that child, you call your boss, the Regional Director of Social Services. He's a good friend of mine. Ask him if he wants a lawsuit for harassment and abuse of authority against a family that is paying for a private suite in this hospital. Miss Davidson looked at the card, then at Richard, and finally at the luxurious room. She knew when she had lost a battle. The system was designed to crush the poor, not to fight against millionaires. She closed her folder with a snap. If you present the documents before 5 p.m., we will stop the transfer. But we will be watching, Mr. Thompson. Any irregularities? There won't be any. Good morning, Richard said, pointing to the door. The woman turned and left, followed by the guards. Silence returned to the room. Lily remained clinging to Rose, trembling. Richard turned to them. He exhaled a long sigh, releasing the tension. Is it true? Rose asked, looking at him with moist eyes. You told them we live with you? Richard approached the bed and sat on the edge. He took Lily's hand, which still wore the red thread bracelet. I didn't lie to them, Rose. I just told them the truth early. Richard looked at the girl. I promised you I would be your shield. A shield is useless if it's kept hidden. You're coming to live at home, you and Rose. Ethan is already preparing the guest room. He says he needs someone to teach him real football, because I'm a mess. Lily looked at him incredulously. What if I misbehave? She asked with the insecurity of someone who has always been rejected. Richard smiled and caressed her cheek, wiping away a tear. Then I'll ground you without dessert like a daughter. But never, listen closely, never will I kick you out. That door is closed forever, Lily. Now you're a Thompson, and Thompsons take care of our own. Rose closed her eyes, and 2 tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. She had waited 30 years. She had suffered unspeakable things. But seeing that man, the child she once fed, become the father her granddaughter needed, she knew that all the pain had been worth it. The circle had closed, the red thread had worked. The end of the thread, resolution and legacy. Scene 1. The exit from the White Labyrinth. 3 weeks later, the midday sun struck the glass facade of the Metropolitan Sanatorium Hospital, but this time the light didn't seem cold or distant. It seemed like a blessing. The automatic doors opened with a soft hiss, and Richard emerged, pushing a wheelchair. In the chair was Grandma Rose, no longer the bundle of dying bones who had entered that fateful night. Although still thin and with sparse white hair, there was color in her cheeks. She wore a soft lavender wool outfit Richard had bought for her, and a newly woven blanket rested on her legs. But most importantly, it was her gaze. Her honey eyes no longer sought death, but eagerly absorbed every detail of the world. By her side walked Lily. The transformation was complete, not only because of the floral dress or the shiny patent leather shoes, but because of her posture. She no longer walked hunched over, expecting a blow or a shout. She walked with her chin held high, holding Ethan's hand, who carried his new sister's backpack with protective pride. Are you sure you paid everything, Rod? Rose asked for the 10th time, turning her head back. I don't want to get a bill. I don't even have money for gum. Richard let out a genuine laugh, a sound his office employees wouldn't recognize. Everything's paid, Rose, and what isn't? We'll invent it. Forget about money. Your only job now is to breathe and put on some weight. You weigh less than a sigh. The valet parking brought the car. It was no longer the 2-seater sports sedan. It was a spacious, safe family SUV. Richard had traded his speed toy for a vehicle that could fit everyone. As he helped Rose into the passenger seat with extreme delicacy, Lily paused on the sidewalk. She looked back, towards the city, towards the direction of the dark alley. Richard noticed the pause, closed Rose's door, and knelt beside the girl. What are you looking at? He asked softly. Never again, Lily whispered, pointing towards the gray horizon of the poor neighborhoods. Really? I'll never have to look for food in the garbage again. Richard took her hands. He felt the red thread bracelet on the girl's wrist, the infinity knot brushing his fingers. Look at me, Lily. He waited for her dark eyes to connect with his. Before you ever go hungry again, I'll stop breathing. It's a blood promise, never again. Lily nodded, and a timid but real smile illuminated her face. She got into the car. Ethan jumped in after her. "I call the window," the boy shouted. "No, me," Lily replied, laughing. It was the sound of childhood recovered. Richard closed the door, took a deep breath of the city air, and got behind the wheel. He wasn't going to a meeting. He was going home. Scene 2, Justice in Aisle 4. But before going to the mansion, Richard had a pending stop. "Where are we going, Dad?" Ethan asked, seeing Richard take the exit towards the mall. "Home is the other way." "We have an important purchase to make, son," Richard said with a determined look in the rearview mirror. "Something we left unfinished." The SUV stopped in front of the same supermarket where it all began. The neon sign flickered under the sun. Lily tensed in the back seat. The memory of the cashier's humiliating shouts was still fresh. "Don't be afraid," Richard said, turning off the engine. "This time it's different. Let's go." They all got out. Richard pushed Rose's wheelchair. They entered through the automatic doors. The air conditioning, the smell of the bakery, the hum of the cash registers. The setting was the same, but the actors had changed roles. Richard walked directly towards the dairy aisle. His leather shoes resonated with authority. People moved aside, not out of disgust this time, but because of the magnetic presence emanating from the group. They reached the shelf. Richard took not 1 but 10 cans of the most expensive powdered milk, the same one Lily had tried to buy. He filled the cart with food, chocolates, fruits, toys, everything a child would dream of. Then he headed for the checkouts. He scanned the aisles. There she was, the same cashier. The woman with the sour face was still chewing gum and scanning products disdainfully. Richard joined her line. Ethan and Lily clung to his legs. Rose observed in silence, understanding what Richard was doing. When it was his turn, Richard began to place the cans on the conveyor belt. The cashier looked up, bored. "Do you have a loyalty card?" she asked mechanically. Then she stopped, looked at Lily, recognized the eyes, looked at Richard, recognized the man in the suit, though he was now wearing jeans and a polo shirt, and looked at the elderly woman in the wheelchair. Color drained from the woman's face. Her gum stopped chewing. "You," she stammered. "Good afternoon," Richard said with icy courtesy. "I've come to pay a debt." The cashier swallowed, looking sideways, looking for security, looking for an exit. "Sir, I was just doing my job." "The rules say that I'm not here to complain about your rules," Richard interrupted. He pulled out his platinum card, the same one that had gleamed that day. "I've come to complete the transaction you interrupted. Charge everything." The trembling woman scanned the products. The beeping of the machine sounded like a countdown. That's $300, she said in a weak voice. Richard paid, but didn't move. He turned to the long line of people waiting behind him. Hardworking people, mothers with children, elderly people counting coins. "Listen, everyone." Richard raised his voice. The supermarket fell silent. 3 weeks ago, at this very checkout, a child cried from hunger, and no one did anything. I did nothing, we all looked away. Richard looked at the cashier who wanted to sink under the counter. Poverty is not a crime, and indifference is the worst disease. Today I want to celebrate that my family is alive. Richard looked at the manager who had come out of his office at the commotion. "Manager," Richard called. "Close the registers." "Excuse me?" the man in the cheap tie asked. "I said close the registers. Everyone in this supermarket right now, their bill is on me." A murmur of disbelief ran through the place. "Everyone?" asked a lady with a cart full of diapers. "Everyone," Richard affirmed. "With one condition." He turned to the cashier. "That next time someone doesn't have money to pay for a child's milk, you remember this moment, and you remember that dignity is priceless." The cashier lowered her head, utterly ashamed. Tears of humiliation welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Lily, letting go of Richard's leg, approached the counter. She took one of the chocolate bars Richard had bought, extended it towards the cashier. "Here," the girl said with disarming innocence. "You look sad. My grandma says chocolate cures sadness." The girl's gesture was the final blow. The cashier burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. The manager, red with embarrassment, nodded at Richard. People in line began to applaud. It wasn't a movie-like applause. It was a spontaneous human applause. Richard didn't smile arrogantly. He just took the handle of Rose's chair. "Let's go home," he said. Scene 3. The warmth of home. Epilogue. 1 year later. The garden of the Thompson Manor was unrecognizable. Where there had once been meticulously mowed lawn and cold marble statues no one looked at, there was now a chaos of life. There was a poorly placed soccer goal, bicycles lying on the grass, and a long wooden table under the shade of a century-old oak tree. It was Sunday. The air smelled of barbecue and laughter. Richard stood in front of the grill, wearing an apron that said "The Boss," stained with sauce. He no longer wore a watch. His wrist was adorned only by one thing, a red thread bracelet, worn from use with an infinity knot. "Dad, Lily fouled me!" Ethan yelled, running across the lawn, his face red from effort. He had grown. He was stronger, happier. "Liar!" Lily ran behind him, laughing hysterically. Her hair, once dull and tangled, now shone in the sun, long and well cared for, tied with a red ribbon. She tripped over her own feet. "Ref!" Richard shouted, raising a spatula. "Play fair, or you'll miss out on hamburgers." At the table in the shade, Grandma Rose sat like a queen. She had regained weight. Her wrinkles were still there, but they were no longer furrows of suffering, but maps of a life that had found safe harbor. She was knitting. Her hands, though slower, had not lost their magic. "Stop scolding them, Rod," she said, smiling. "Let them run. Children need to wear out their shoes. That's what they're for." Richard approached the table and poured her a glass of fresh lemonade. He kissed her forehead. "Are you well, Mom?" he asked. "I'm better than well, son." Rose put her needles down on the table. "You know, I was thinking." Richard became serious for a moment. The memory always hurt a little, like an old scar. "I think about it sometimes too. How close I came to losing everything. Losing you, losing myself." Rose took Richard's hand, caressing the red bracelet on his wrist. "But you didn't lose us, because the thread stretches, it tangles, but it never breaks." Rose looked out at the garden where Ethan and Lily were rolling on the grass, laughing hysterically. "Look at that, Rod. That's what you built. Not your company building, not your bank accounts. That." Richard looked at the children. Lily, the girl who had been invisible to the world, now shone with her own light. She went to school, got the best grades in math, and, according to teachers, had a gift for leadership. Ethan, who had been destined to be a rich and lonely child, now had a compassionate heart and a sister he would die for. "I know," Richard said, his throat tight. "I'm the richest man in the world, and it has nothing to do with the bank." The front doorbell rang. The butler, who now smiled much more often, appeared in the garden. "Mr. Richard, the guests for the charity gala have arrived." Richard nodded. He took off his apron. That night, they were inaugurating the Rosemary Smith Community Center, a comprehensive shelter for families experiencing homelessness. It wasn't a cold orphanage, it was a home. A place where no one would have to return milk. "Let's go," Richard said. "Wait," Lily said, running up, panting. "Dad, your shoelace is untied. You can't go out like that to give your speech." The girl knelt on the grass, not caring about staining her new dress, and deftly tied Richard's shoelaces. Richard looked down at her. He saw the crown of her head. He remembered the day in the supermarket when he looked down at her with contempt from his height. Now he looked at her with absolute devotion. Lily stood up and dusted off her hands. "Ready, now you look like a president." Richard bent down and hugged her. It was a long, strong hug. "Thank you, daughter." "For tying your shoe?" she asked, surprised. "For saving my life," he whispered in her ear. Richard stood up, took Ethan's hand and Lily's hand. Grandma Rose moved forward with her walker. She hardly used the chair anymore. Together they walked towards the house. The camera slowly pulls away, rising towards the blue sky, revealing the garden full of life. The image fades to black, but before disappearing, a final close-up appears. Richard's wrist holding Lily's hand. The red thread glows in the sun. The infinity knot is firm. No one is so poor that they cannot give a hug, nor so rich that they do not need one.